mwezi wa 10 tarehe 12. Akaniambia ameenda Jerusalem kwa Makenzi kutafuta Yesu. Changwani.
Endelea.
Changwani. Sasa nimemtafuta lakini nimempata. Ni short nimempata.
Umempata akiwa hali gani?
Aliko sawa, alikuwa anatoka Kisiagi, amenomena na unga, aenda kupika msituni akule huko mwezi wa 6 ngojea Yesu ndiye aende.
Wewe unajisikiaje?
Mimi niko sawa, nafurahia kwa sababu nimempata, kwa sababu watu wako wananiambia ni wapee kijana yao.
Shakahola nilienda kwa kuchochewa kwa uvumi wa maisha ya kule na ya huku. Nikaona maisha ya huku sitaweza kustahamili vizuri kama yale ya kule. Hilo lengo langu la kuniondoa huku kwenda kule nipate mahali nitakaa bila kusumbuka.
Alitizia tukasikia watoto waende shule. Ndio tukaanza kufuatilia at least tujue wako wapi, wako aje. Akatuambia wako Malindi lakini hakuniambia the specific place wenye wako. So mimi nikajituma hadi Mombasa. Sikuwa najua Malindi. Nikakuja Mombasa kumtafuta lakini hakunifanya nini? Hakunipea direction. Mimi karudi nyumbani. So venye hizi news zimebamba sijui Makenzi ndio at least tukajua wako hapa.
Nimekuja hapa kuangalia msichana wangu ambaye kwa wakati huu sijamuona. Tumepotezana mawasiliano tangu mwezi wa 3. Yuko kule Shakahola. Ameenda huko yeye na bwanake pamoja na watoto wake 3.
What the hell?
I mean, and there are more stories that we would listen to those Kenyans and them expressing why they did that. And of course, there's that lady who is happy to be reunited with her husband. And Martha, you wanted to say something.
I wanted to say something
to this.
Yeah, because you know, I listened to Doctrine here, and I also agree to a large extent for the role that NCCK used to play that time. And the church I grew up in, I mean, even you, someone you are growing up, you could name the number of churches with one hand. It was Anglican, Catholic, PCA, you could mention them. Actually, less than 10. Today, and I know it's not very popular to actually talk about this, and that's why even in 2013, politics and religion are very interlinked. Not very many politicians will be willing to say openly that we need a regulation of the churches. Because, first of all, we are beneficiaries of the same podium. So you'll get us playing, you know, by the periphery. But I want to be sincere and say, today, how many denominations do you know on a Boelachi? In your constituency or in my constituency. I cannot count them. You cannot account for all of them. Every day there's a new church springing from somewhere. I don't even think they follow the Societies Act at all in terms of registration. So even as we say this is not a church thing, we, you know, those who listen to reggae music like myself, there is a reggae musician called Max Romeo. And he did a song in the 70s, I think in the 80s, that was called Stealing in the Name of the Lord. That the church can sacrifice for the reverend to drive a fancy car. And that is exactly what is happening right now, by the way, because you may say it's not a church thing, but people are using church teachings to actually exploit Kenyans and to lure them to their graves. Because how do you explain someone tells you to fast and he is eating himself and you are, you know, you staring at death. We have seen them being rescued, some refusing to actually get an IV and saying, I don't want to be rescued, I have an appointment with Jesus. So I want to tell the church, and this is in a very polite, I know it's not very popular, whether it is the government that does it, whether it's the church that does it, someone has to do it.
Yes.
And we have to be very straightforward about it because we may be unpopular as a politician when you bring it. I remember in 2013, we sat in the Senate with the Lachi, and it tried to come to the floor. By the time it gets to the floor, these guys will have called you for so many meetings. NCCK, the Interreligious Council, I don't know who, they have called you to meetings to threaten, and you know we are going to an election, so you will actually cow down and be afraid for this regulation. But it has to be done, Sam, because we are losing a generation, we have lost a society, and actually this 73 should, actually the Red Cross is saying it should go almost to 100. And if all the people who have lost their family members to this indoctrination speak out, you'll be shocked. And it's no longer about poverty. By the way, how do you explain the beautiful air hostess who had a good job, who sold her land and went to give to this guy? We have seen a lawyer transfer to some cult leader in this country. And there are very many, by the way. They are ticking bombs today. And they have bigger quorum and bigger crowds than you can ever get even in a political rally that is actually hosting a presidential candidate. We have to speak about it. Right. And this regulation, it is either going to come from government or the churches. And I want to tell the church even today, if you don't want to be regulated by government, by using government hand, please draft something for your own self-regulation, bring it to Parliament. We will consider it. By the way, you can even petition Parliament. Anyone can write to Parliament. Because if it is making the rules tighter in the Societies Act, give the threshold of what a church is. Yeah. You cannot be having some forest and start with 3 people. By the end of the day, you're recruiting soldiers. And these guys are bad, by the way. First of all, they are very witty. They are also very streetwise, and they are very smart. So they will know what to say even to the congregants, to tell them tomorrow bring one more person. Tomorrow, it's like network marketing, the one we used to see with pyramid schemes. So they continue growing and growing. And you're told, when you come to Shakahola, you will not have more trouble. That's what the man there was saying in that what we've just watched. So if you have an issue, and by the way, we'll always have issues. I will just need to identify what is troubling you. And I will use it to ensure and tell you, well, come and meet your kind, where you will not suffer. You don't need to talk to your family. You don't have to carry the baggage of your relatives. Then you'll be safe. They all end up in these graves. So we must do it. Someone has to do it. The church should actually provide the way. If not, the government should.
And Dr. tell me about, because I know initially churches are supposed to have a certain set of, what do they call their doctrine. How does a new church come up with doctrine? Even as you go to get registered, how do you identify what your doctrine is and how do you teach it? Is there a way that through the theological schools people can be taught about that, or they are being taught about that, but also the foundation of that? Where does it start?
I wanted to begin by saying that a society without a proper religion to moderate its morality is a decaying society. And there is something we call poverty of the mind. Poverty of the mind has nothing to do whether you went to school or not. So when you have poverty of the mind, and then you have again poverty-related, the normal material poverty-related mentality combined together, you will require a proper background for you to grow up. Okay, how is there a way that we are able to understand the proper doctrine? Yes, the church was brought in this part of the world with the missionaries. And the missionaries laid foundation of different churches. And in most cases, what missionaries laid down was too scriptural. They began from the script. For example, the church where I belong, it started from three areas. We started from the school, health, and then the scripture. Holistic man. The right theology will tell you that a man, an all-round man, must be holistic, mind, spirit, and soul. And that will determine which church you go to. That brings me to a question of all of you who are standing here, who are seated here, if you went to Sunday school. If you went to Sunday school, you determine which Sunday school did you go. If you went to Sunday school, you are taught who is God, who is the creator, why were you created, and what you are created for what? What are you supposed to do as a child of God? That alone gives that child a foundation. So as the child grows and learns about spirituality and Christianity, he understands why he was created. But these people are taking advantage of specific churches in that particular community. Right. And so again, I agree with my colleagues here. That's why we need to find out, is there something can we regulate ourselves as a church so that we understand what kind of religion, what kind of training is in that Sunday school? Because if the training of that Sunday school child is not structured, scriptural, and is cultic.
So when you say regulate yourselves as the church, are you talking about your denomination, PCEA, or are you talking...
As a church, I mean, the church is structured in different bodies. For sure, there is nobody who will be left in the air to do what he wants as per his culture and his mindset and bring his tradition and call it a church. The church is structured in organization. We have the Church National Council of Churches, which is about 32 member churches, 7 million people. If you are there are standards put across. There are standards within we operate in. There is leadership structure. There is how we cooperate together how we coexist together on specific standards of life. What are the values?
So for those that are not members of NCCK,
those are the members of
KCCB or
they'll be members of KCCB. Or if they are not members of KCCB, we have a way that we can look at it and say, these are the standards of faith. The standards of faith as this. And then what we call a cult, we understand cultic behavior than any other person who is not a theologian. A cult is anybody who speaks the scripture through an individual, but not from the right scriptural perspective.
That's what I'm asking. For an organization like what Paul Mackenzie was leading, how now do you get that regulated in the structures we have currently?
It can be regulated so long as already he has to be registered with under the societies.
If not?
If not, then we need to come up with a structure. That's why my colleague from Nyeri said, we need to come up with a structure and tell me, if you are not registered, then where are you? If you belong to Kenya, then you must rank under the Constitution. The Constitution must have an area where we say, every church must rank under these particular rules. But if you give me a leeway, then any crook will come up and do anything he wants. And that's why I agree.
Okay, I want us to transition.
But then, while we regulate, then we must have a monitoring system.
Yes.
Because, and then you need to ask yourself, what is a church? Is it about one person? Is it, and do you need to have a structure? Do you need to have people? I mean, all those things. And do you do returns to the registrar since you're already under the, do they do returns? And if a church has not done returns for like 2 years, 3 years, then it is good and fair to just remove it until it comes and says why it did not bring their returns. I think that way you're able to know even how many do we have and what is the ideology. Because, I mean, slowly by slowly, you find that we have taken advantage, especially during COVID time. I think now is when we took advantage completely. Because remember now we stopped going to church, and so everyone opened their own thing at home, and so those things must be followed through now. And we must go back, and the registrar of societies should even come here and tell Kenyans, how many churches do we have in the country?
Some we have schools. Those schools do returns, church schools. Presbyterian schools do returns like anybody else. Universities, hospitals, which means they rank under a particular system. So you'll not go to Kikuyu Hospital and do what you want without following the laws of Kenya.
Right. Okay.
Just a close on it. I just wanted to close on what Bishop has said. And it's within the element of regulation. If you don't belong to any, if it's NCCK or KCCP, where do you belong? You belong nowhere. Nowhere. If Paul Mackenzie and other freelance preachers, there's so many freelance guys who get into buses and preach. If you were to sit back and ask, where do you belong? They belong nowhere. And therefore, it's not possible to regulate such people because they are not religious groups. It is either you are registered and therefore can be regulated, or you are not registered and you fall into the position of criminals, and the remainder of what a criminal is you belong to prison. So it only boils down to a registration regime. Any other person who has got a church, a place of worship, whether in private or public, because that is the constitutional dictate, must be registered. And it's going to be a challenge to the registrar of societies to give us statistics, to give us returns, to give us also a list of those who have filed returns and not, so that at the end of the day, we can put people to account.
Okay. And of course, don't miss out on the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya.
How many are they?
I think there's also a
Sam, that is actually the issue. Because today, if you're offended by a doctor, let's say a botched surgery, whether in a private hospital or a public hospital, you can take them to KMPDU. You know where to take them.
Yes. Yeah.
You know where to lodge your complaint. Yeah. If you're offended by a lawyer, a rogue lawyer, we have LSK. You know where to take your complaint. So how do we get to that? And that is my challenge to NCCK. How do we get where NCCK was? In the 60s, in the 70s, it was like the third arm of government. In fact, there was executive, there was judiciary. If you read the history, the church was vocal. It was clear on issues, even political.
The voice of the prophet.
It was clear. Today, it's hazy. You don't know where the evangelicals lie. You don't know where the NCCK, now who are the members of NCCK from the breakup, which is the other KCCP. We don't even know how many they are, the organizations themselves. Okay. So how do we get there? I know it is a very unpopular thing to say, but it has to be done, and it will start most likely in Parliament, if you ask me.
Yes.
That way, we'll have public participation.
Yes.
They will come with their list of their churches, and someone has to do it somehow, because if we don't do it, we are going to lose a society as
our
we
children
watch.
Will stop going to church.
As we watch,
and
because people,
very sad.
I mean, there is a reason we are told to have a personal relationship with God. Because nowadays, we used to actually almost worship, when we were growing up, to almost worship church leaders, the reverends, the bishops. But today, it's different, because even them, we have amongst them rogue ones. So how do we balance the freedom of worship and getting to ensure that we protect life and we protect the sanctity of our country?
Okay, all right. So much work to be done, but also very many lessons that we are picking from what has just happened. I want us to transition, but before we do so, the first group of Kenyan evacuees